By using ability and determination, this woman single-handedly brought about a new kind of journalism, an exciting path to discovery. She brought answers to people, changes to society, and help to those in need. She was not a president, politician, or war hero, as one might think when they hear the word leader. Nellie Bly was a leader of change who used experience and extraordinary talent to reach audiences through her words. Her writings changed journalism, women's suffrage, opinions, viewpoints, injustices, and untrue prejudices of what girls were good for. She was born Elizabeth Jane Cochran in Cochran's Mills, Pennsylvania on May 5, 1864. Her parents were very wealthy given that her father Michael was judge and founder of the town. Unfortunately, in 1870, Elizabeth's father suddenly passed away. He had not left a will to ensure his estate to his family, and so they were left in financial ruin. To support her mother, Elizabeth attended the Indiana Normal School at age 15 to train in teaching, one of the few careers that women were allowed to pursue. Elizabeth left after one semester because she had no money to continue. She and her mother then moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In January of 1885, a column published in the Pittsburgh Dispatch newspaper hit a nerve with Elizabeth. The article, entitled "What Girls Are Good For," was an opinionated account of how its author, Erasmus Wilson, viewed women's roles in society. Writing under the pen name Quiet Observer, Wilson told of how women belong at home raising children, sewing, cooking, and cleaning. He made his opinion clear that women should not stray from their domestic jobs and claimed that a working woman was a monstrosity. Outraged by the article's conclusions, Elizabeth wrote a letter to the Dispatch and signed it "Lonely Orphan Girl." George Madden, the managing editor of the paper, was so impressed by the feisty letter that he put out an ad requesting to meet the lonely orphan girl. He challenged her to write a refutation of Wilson's article to be published. She entitled it "The Girl Puzzle" and was hired for her impressive work in 1885. Selecting her pen name after the popular Stephen Foster song, she became Nellie Bly. Nellie began writing raw articles with hard-hitting topics. She wrote columns about the girls who worked in Pittsburgh factories. Nellie went so far as to impersonate a sweatshop worker in order to tell of the dreadful working conditions. But despite her clear promise and skill, her editors could not accept that she was a woman who wanted to write about more than flower shows and fashion, so they placed her on the women's page to write about just that. To escape her new position, Nellie became a correspondent in Mexico to do a tourism article on the country, but she soon discovered major scandals within the government, and when threatened with jail, she quickly left the country. Bly later published her book, 6 Months in Mexico, about the experience. She returned to the Dispatch in 1887 to be placed on the women's page again. This was the last straw. Nellie left a note for Wilson saying, "Dear Q.O., I'm off for New York. Look out for me, Bly." And she was off in search of greater success. For 6 months, Nellie went to many newspapers in New York, inquiring about work, but women were rarely accepted. Bly persevered and was finally accepted by John Cockrell, managing editor of Joseph Pulitzer's New York World. On September 22, 1887, to test his new reporter's ability, Cockrell asked Bly if she could do a story on the care for the patients at Blackwell Islands Asylum in New York City. She accepted and went off to complete what will be her first and probably most well-remembered investigative assignment. Bly and Cockrell changed her identity for the event to Nellie Brown, a Cuban woman, and she checked into a boarding house for working women. She convinced the boarding home tenants, the jury at Essex Market Police Courtroom, and endless doctors and specialists of her insanity. She spent a night at Bellevue Hospital before being taken to Blackwell Islands Asylum on September 25. Bly was taken away with crowds of people watching, trying to get a glimpse of the crazy girl, as she describes it in her book. She became a huge story. All of the newspapers were buzzing about Nellie Brown, the crazy Cuban woman. Upon entering the asylum, all of the new patients were interviewed. Bly had decided that she would act completely normal once she was admitted. Although she answered all the questions honestly, she passed as insane due to uncaring doctors. Many of the people Nellie met were not in the asylum for insanity. At the time, if hospitals were too full, too busy, or if a person was too expensive for a family to take care of, asylums were used as human storage. Bly met one woman who was quite sane and asked her why she was there. The woman told her that she had applied to be sent to a poorhouse, but was sent to the asylum. When she discovered that it was for insane women, she was informed that it was where many of the poor people that applied for aid was sent. Bly met another woman by the name of Tilly Mayard. She had no mental issues, but was suffering a medical condition with her nervous system. When she discovered that she was in the hospital as an insane patient, she confronted a doctor. He laughed and told her that she would not be getting out. Bly recounted Tilly and the doctor's discussion in her novel. "If you know anything at all," Tilly responded, "you should be able to tell that I am perfectly sane. Why don't you test me?" "We know all we want to on that score," said the doctor, and he left the poor girl condemned to an insane asylum, probably for life, without giving her one feeble chance to prove her sanity. Nellie experienced and later exposed many horrors of the care in the asylum. She recounted the food, usually consisting of bread with spiders in it and rancid butter, or tough spoiled meat that the patients without teeth would starve trying to chew. The patients were only bathed once a week, and only given a change of dress about once a month. To continue the illusion of a well-run establishment, they were rushed to change into a nice dress if they were to see a visitor. The patients were put to work cleaning, mending apparel, and other tasks, including taking care of the nurses' rooms and clothing. The temperature of the hospital was freezing. Many of the patients requested warmer clothing, but were refused them, despite the fact that the nurses wore heavy coats. Tilly Mayard had trouble with the cold, suffering seizures and fainting. A fellow patient held her and called a nurse, who responded with, "Let her fall on the floor and it will teach her a lesson." Nellie often asked other patients why they didn't report the nurse's cruelty. The patients informed her that they couldn't benefit, because the doctors would claim it was their insane minds making things up, and the nurses would threaten punishment by choking and holding them in a bathtub until they drowned for telling. Nellie's planned escape arrived when lawyer Peter A. Hendricks checked her out of the asylum. Nellie had dreamed of leaving, but felt guilty, saying in her book, "There was a certain pain in leaving. For 10 days I had been one of them. Foolishly enough, it seemed intensely selfish to leave them to their sufferings." Bly published her findings as a series of illustrated articles in the New York World under the title Behind Asylum Bars, as well as the novel 10 Days in a Madhouse. The public was appalled at the story, sparking a deeper investigation. Hoping to help the unfortunate patients, Nellie gladly went before a jury. The investigation was directed by New York's Assistant District Attorney Vernon M. Davis. Bly and the jurors went to the island and interrogated many of the nurses and doctors. Dr. Dent, whom Bly had often encountered during her investigation, testified that he had no way of knowing how the nurses treated the patients, and stated that if the food or cleanliness of the establishment wasn't proper, it was due to insufficient funding. As a result of Bly's extraordinary work and the findings of her investigation, the New York City Department of Public Charities and Corrections provided extra doctors, new regulations, and an increase in the funding of New York's asylums by $1 million to better care for the mentally ill. At just 23 years old, Nellie Bly was becoming a famous reporter, founding a new brand of undercover journalism known as stunt reporting. Throughout Nellie's career, she always focused on the poor and disadvantaged. She exposed conspiracies within the medical field, politics, and the awful conditions of prisons and poorhouses. She interviewed many other celebrities, including boxer John L. Sullivan and suffragist Susan B. Anthony. She attended and covered important events, including suffrage conventions and the Pullman strike of 1894. People were fascinated in what Nellie Bly was up to next. Perhaps one of her most exciting adventures was when she set out to complete a trip around the world. Bly was inspired by the 1873 Jules Verne novel Around the World in 80 Days, and wanted to break its fictional character Phileas Fogg's record. Bly began her journey on November 14, 1889, and returned to New York on January 25, 1890. Her trip took 72 days, 6 hours, 11 minutes, and 14 seconds, setting a world record. Her novel, Around the World in 72 Days, describes her journey, including her meeting with Jules Verne in France. 5 years later, 30-year-old Nellie Bly married Robert Seaman, a 70-year-old millionaire who owned the Ironclad Manufacturing Company. They lived in New York City for 10 years before he died in 1905. Nellie, having taken a break from her journalism career, ran her late husband's business until it went bankrupt. She returned to reporting, becoming America's first female wartime reporter, writing articles about being at the front lines of World War I. Picking up a career with the New York Journal in 1920, she was as good as ever. She raised money for children and widows and aided women in finding jobs. She was a courageous writer all her life, remaining a journalist to the very end. She died of pneumonia on January 27, 1922, at age 57. The next day, the New York Journal published a tribute to her life and career and acknowledged her as the best reporter in America. Nellie Bly was devoted to helping people in need, whether it was women who were denied work, people who were poor and struggling, or people who just had no one to tell their side of the story. She brought about changes in the care for the mentally ill, the opinions of what jobs women were allowed to do, and the way reporting was done. She paved the way for the muckrakers of the 20th century. She opened the doors for female journalists like Barbara Ehrenreich, Dorothy Thompson, and even more modern reporters like Barbara Walters. Nellie Bly left a legacy of a reformed society, bettering everything and everyone she reached through her words and writing.